Hello, so we're out here on Audubon's Kiowa Creek Ranch with Dave McNitt. And Dave, tell us a little bit about who's Dave?
So my name is Dave McNitt. I'm a private lands wildlife biologist with Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. I work in partnership with Natural Resources Conservation Service and Colorado Parks and Wildlife to enhance wildlife habitat and restore forests on private lands.
There it is. So we got a hold of Dave so we've got about 1,500 acres. Most of it, about half of it, is forest, and so we wanted to try to figure out what do we need to do to benefit the ecology of our forest? How do we be a good steward of our forests? Being an Audubon property, Audubon is one of the largest conservation organizations in the world, dedicated to birds and the places they live. And so we wanted to do right by the birds, do right by the forest, so we got a hold of Dave. And really what unfolded is a lot of stuff that we really didn't even think about. So yeah, tell us a little bit, Dave. Like we did some work behind us. You can see the machine. You can see the after effects of cutting a lot of trees. So why would we cut trees to do right by the forest?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it comes up a lot because I think a lot of us think that trees are what make a forest, so trees are good and we don't want to cut them down. But in recent years, we've seen the effects of having too many trees in a forest, and here in Colorado's Black Forest, that was really made evident after the Black Forest wildfire in 2013. And that kind of led to a lot of the work going on here on the ranch, right?
Yeah.
So, fire is just one symptom of kind of this larger problem, which is that we've suppressed and excluded natural fire from forests. And a lot of these forests on Colorado's Front Range burn very frequently. Many of them as much as every 1 to 35 years the forests were burning. So part of that is that without this natural fire that maintained open forest, we have trees kind of filling in every little gap, and the forests become very dense and the trees are competing with each other. So you end up with this very what we call a homogeneous forest, where the trees are the same size, the same age. You have a lot of small trees, and that can be catastrophic when fire comes through, because the fire moves very easily from treetop to treetop and it can burn very intensely. But that also has negative effects for wildlife, because you are lacking habitat diversity in the forest. You kind of have just this closed forest, and there are a few species that benefit from that, but the vast majority are adapted to these open forests, and they need meadows and openings, which there were many more of historically, and they need large trees and things like that. So by coming in and removing some trees, we can bring these openings back, the meadows. We can open up some of these gaps again. We can release trees and let them grow large, so it makes the forest safer for fire because there are less trees, and better for wildlife because there's more grass growing in the meadows and more large trees.
You told me once a long time ago, and this was kind of the discovery for us, is like when we first started out, like I wasn't thinking fire. I was thinking, how do we make better bird habitat? And so, like you've told me, like a lot of these forests, like you said, historically burnt maybe what? Every 5 years?
Some of them were burning every few years, let's say every 5 years.
Yeah. So to some degree, like whether it's like from a lightning strike or for whatever else. So like the way I understood it, like we had a lot of small fires that wouldn't get out of control, right?
Yeah, a lot of fires that burned at a lower intensity. So they were burning in the grass and shrubs and wildflowers and things like that. And they would burn some of the smaller, younger trees, and maybe occasionally they would get up in the canopy and burn some larger trees. But they weren't like the fires we see now, where you have this raging fire blowing through the forest.
Yeah, and why is that? They kind of go out on their own, right? And is that because the forest was healthier then?
Yeah, so when it was more open, the flames would not get up into the canopies of the trees. And also, the only trees that were able to survive in those frequent fire forests were ones that were well adapted to fire. So ponderosa pines. And in some forests we see more firs and spruce, and those trees are more likely, they have needles down to the ground and thinner bark, they're more likely to burn all the way up to the top. So you had more open forests with trees that were more adapted to frequent fire and were
Yeah.
less likely to burst into flames. And it's important to consider that those higher elevation forests, where there were spruce and fir and lodgepole pine historically, they did burn at higher severities, but it was more focused to those isolated areas. Now we see kind of really any forest has the potential to burn at a really high severity.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so like with a healthier forest, there is a lot of grassland. Where we're at is mostly ponderosa pine. And if there's one tree, from what I understand, on the planet that is, it wants to burn. That's what keeps it healthy. And yeah, and so we'll do some more videos kind of digging into that, because I dork out on this stuff. But point of the story so far is really why we cut these trees is to recreate what nature has been doing for millions of years, right? And so we're recreating that habitat, those birds, all of the other wildlife, like they're drawn to that more park-like look that you can see behind us. And some other videos we'll dig into more on that. Alrighty.